when Paul was preaching?
So, good question. Where were the other apostles when Paul was preaching? The other apostles were around, we traveled around preaching. The other apostles were traveling around teaching. And there were more than the 12 traveling around preaching. There were many dozens, many dozens of teachers out teaching.
How did
At the same time Paul was teaching.
yeah, but how did Jesus disseminate and what kind of instructions did he give to his apostles and his teachers to spread his word? And how, and once that information was given, because you have your apostles, and then Paul's view, how did things become distorted or separated?
Well, first of all, understand that Jesus, when Jesus died, after he died, Paul didn't come on the scene for several years after that. Paul was persecuting people, and Paul openly admits that. I mean, it's factually accurate, and there's plenty of writings that document that, and that's even in the Bible itself. So that's not disputed, is the point. So even the folks many of the folks who wrote the Bible, who had an agenda to push Paul's teaching, don't dispute that. So Paul came on the scene several years later. That's number one. He had that vision, as I said. He started teaching his own thing. He told us that he was teaching what we were teaching, which I've kind of hit some bullet points on earlier. And he wasn't. And we called him back to a meeting after, I think, 4 or 5 years or something like that, to Jerusalem. And we basically had a discussion about this, a fairly energetic, let's say, discussion about this. And he agreed to go and change his teaching to what Jesus had asked us to teach. And he went out, and as far as we could tell from what we heard from various of the villages and so forth he visited, that he continued teaching his way, even though he said he was going to teach what we had described to him and explained to him what Jesus' teaching was. Because again, he was not with Jesus. He didn't know what the teaching was. So Paul went his own way. And then to further kind of answer your question, how this whole kind of thing got more and more confused and more early Christianity developed, there were many other contributors to this whole religion of Christianity that really was very different from the teachings of Jesus. So Justin the Martyr is one person, Tertullian is another person. There are various other individuals through history, and they were active in, I think it was like around 150 AD, around there, 160 AD, 130 AD, somewhere in that range. They're throwing in their ideas. Other people are throwing in their ideas. This whole notion of hell and heaven, and this notion of hell you and I were talking about earlier, that all came into play through the book of Revelations. It's not even in the main part of the Bible. There is no mention of hell. About 330 AD, there was a meeting in Constantinople. And Constantine had a meeting, and with all then, you know, it's 300 years later, it's still early on, but it's 300 years after Jesus died, they had a meeting of all these early Christian leaders, and they said, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to include? What we're not going to include into this thing we're going to call the Bible? And they include this, let's include this. No, no, we're not going to include this, we're going to include this. No, let's keep that out. What about this book of Revelations? A lot of debate about the book of Revelations. A lot of people thought it was too far out there. And if you read the book of Revelations, it's pretty out there. And none of that has anything to do with the teachings of Jesus as I remember it. But just look, you can look at it yourself, the book of Revelations, and read it and you kind of go, wow. Well, that's where the idea of hell is introduced. And even my point is that even the early Christian leaders of the Christianity in 330 AD in Constantinople did not agree on whether this whole notion of hell and this whole book of Revelations itself should be included in Christianity. So those are facts. And people can check, they can do fact checking themselves. Go read what the historians show. Go read the originals if you can read the original in the original texts from 330 AD. What Constantine and the other had all these other religious leaders meeting, what they said. This is well documented. So this whole notion of hell is something that people have concocted. But let's just talk about punishment. You know, because people may say, oh, okay, Book of Revelations. A lot of Christians now, a lot of churches don't even believe, Christian churches don't even believe in the Book of Revelations. They cut that out. They do, you know, they dispense with it. But still, there is a significant group of people, whether it's Christians or other religions, who believe in the notion of punishment. And there's this punishment idea of somebody up there, or somebody's plural, maybe, up there, a panel of judges, I don't know, who are judging people and assessing and giving out punishment if people are bad actors, bad behavior. And that's just not the case. That's not been my experience. That's not what I know from not just my memories, but from other experiences that I've had, let's say. And it just doesn't make sense if you think about it. Why would somebody punish? Generally, why does a person punish somebody else? They're usually trying to change behavior. And it's not a good way to change behavior. All of our psychologists on current 21st century planet Earth have lots of studies that show that it doesn't change the behavior, it doesn't work. You know, I was at that meeting I spoke about yesterday at the seminar we were talking about. I shared that story of where I was hearing the LA County District Attorney talk about how punishing people by throwing them in jail doesn't change their behavior. They're just back in the jail. Within 64% of them are back within 6 months, and a third of those people are back within 3 weeks. It doesn't change behavior. You want to change behavior, you have to incentivize people, you have to give them milestones and so forth and so on. I don't need to get into that. There are experts. I'm not an expert on that, but there are experts on that type of how to change people's behavior notion. But punishment is clearly not the way to go. It doesn't work. Plus, as I've already described, you know, whoever's up there, whether we're talking about Jehovah, Jesus, other spiritual leaders, Shankara, other leaders up there on the other side, they know all these studies. They're not stupid. These people they're much more developed and smarter than all of us put together. They know this. So they're not going to do that. Plus, they're not wired that way. These are generous, loving people. These are not people out for retribution in order to teach people that they've been wronged. No, there is a whole notion of free will that is part of the structure of the mind. Making choices ourselves. This is what Jesus taught. This is what he espoused. This is what he exemplified, demonstrated in his own life to everybody. That's been missed for 2,000 years. So what I would love to see is people grasping onto the teachings of Jesus as he taught them 2,000 years ago, these core elements of the teaching, and live their life more fully, more happily. He was all about living in the present, living in the continual present, living a happier life. That's what he was about, helping people make that turn, get out of their suffering mode, get out of their misery mode, make the turn, less and less misery, less and less suffering, more and more happiness, more and more effectiveness in life, more and more friendliness, love, acceptance of people for who they are, their free will, their personal choice to be who they are. That was the world he envisioned happening. That was his vision. That vision has been totally lost over the past 2,000 years. I would love to see that vision be spoken about, be spread more throughout the world, just through conversation. It doesn't have to be through an institution, an organization. No, these are, in a sense, common sense principles, really. But this came from somebody who really espoused them and lived them and demonstrated them in his own life 24/7. So we were all a little bit in awe of him, quite frankly, at the time. Some of us more than others. But as I've grown over my many lifetimes and so forth, I have become more comfortable, so to speak, with embracing these notions that he embodied very naturally. And I think this is something that he demonstrated to us as individuals, just as he was an individual, that we can all do. It's not something that just for Jesus, or only Jesus, or only people like Jesus. Only the people who were with Jesus can live this way. No. His point was that this is the way everybody can live, and if they want to make that choice, they can live life that way. That was his message, essentially. Without fear, no fear of judgment. There is no judgment happening on the other side. There's acceptance. It's a transition period. It's a time to get oneself together, so to speak, and relax, rejuvenate, and then decide whether one wants to stay there, come back another time, go someplace else, maybe not planet Earth, who knows where. But those are choices that each individual can make. You know, I've chosen to come back many, many times. I like it here. There's certain things you can do here that you can't do on the other side. There's certain happiness, certain sources of happiness you can have here that you can't have on the other side. It's different. But those are choices that each individual makes. And there's no judgment in terms of people's actions here. There are consequences. There are absolutely consequences to everything that everybody does. I'm not saying that people can just willy-nilly just treat people however they want to treat them. They can do that, but there are consequences to that. You're going to hurt people. Somebody might hurt you back. You know, there's certain behavior that is kind of in human wiring. So I'm not, I'm not espousing some sort of, kind of thoughtless behavior. But all I'm saying is, from a spiritual standpoint, there's no judgment on the other side. That's the issue. You know, the consequences happen on this side immediately, I think. More immediately than people are willing to admit.